Hi, and welcome to the NewbQuest podcast, in which we talk to game developers, game designers, game artists, people involved in making video games about the process and about everything that goes into it, with an aim to providing some insight for people who are interested in creating their own games, both who are getting started and with a little bit more experience. I am here with Richard Flanders, who is one of the creators of Fract OSC, a very interesting game which has just come out for Mac and PC. Hi, Richard.
Hey, I'm going to correct you there. Flanagan. No harm done, though.
Oh, my gosh.
That's all good. It's all good.
Shame and embarrassment for me right from the start. All right. Well, there we go.
Hello, and thanks for having me on, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, and excuse my butchering of your name there. Off to a great start. Okay, well, so for those who don't know about Fract OSC, how do you describe it to people who have never heard of it?
Well, it's kind of like a first-person exploration puzzle game, but everything's kind of built and inspired around music, actually electronic music. So the player arrives in this kind of broken down and abstract kind of world, and they've got to piece together what's gone wrong, and they come across these structures and these kind of tools that exist in the space, and in order to bring everything back to life, they solve these puzzles, but in that process also shape and end up writing a lot of music in the game. And this kind of like dynamic soundtrack starts kind of building around them based on how they solve the puzzles, the choices they make, and just basically where they go and what they do in the game. And by the end of the game, we trick the player into writing a not inconsequential amount of music.
Awesome. Yeah, I've played a bit of the game, and I just love the atmosphere that you've created. And as someone who comes from a music background, it's just really interesting to see how you approach that, and you know, the way it threads into the game world. When you tell us a little bit about the early story of the game, because it's gone through a couple of iterations, right, to get to where you are now.
For sure. The very first iteration, the prototype I made in, I think it was late 2010. It was a student project that I made. I was studying a one-year game design certificate program here in Montreal, just trying to find a better way to get into the industry here. So I was working on that, and just on a whim submitted it to the IGF, and unbelievably it kind of got noticed and picked up some kind of visibility, and even more crazily it got selected as one of the finalists, and even more crazily ended up winning Best Student Game that year in IGF 2011, which is insane because I didn't even really know what an indie game was at the time, so it was just something I had made, and that sort of launched this question. My wife and I were like, well, do we want to do this? Do we want to kind of roll the dice and see if we can turn this idea that I was working on into something commercial and sellable and like a lifestyle and like a career for us? So much debate, some tears, some yelling, some whatever, but we decided to go for it, and then we started our company after the IGF, and hired our programmer Hank, and began working on the game in earnest, and that was like 3 years ago. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I mean, there's a lot to dig into there. The one thing I just love about that is, and something that I think is just a great thing for everybody listening to take from this, is like, just try things, right? You didn't have like a master plan to win an award at the IGF when you submitted your thing, right? But it turned out that you had something that resonated, and I think that's just a really great kind of inspiration for everybody listening. It's like, you don't know what's going to happen. You put something out there, and of course it might just be completely ignored, which kind of no big deal, or something really great might happen.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Like, I didn't really even know what the IGF was. I joke that I didn't even know what a fill fish was at the time. And it was a big surprise and really awesome.
That's really awesome. And so then, I mean, so you the decision to well, actually, before we move on to the decision to kind of develop the prototype into a commercial product, you came to game design a little later, right? You had already
Uh,
had a career doing, I think, graphic design. Is that correct?
yeah, graphic design, art direction, some motion design too, mostly for the web, but some broadcast, some print, whatever. But lots and lots of graphic design. Yeah, I'd spent at least a decade in that industry in various capacities. But yeah, I always wanted to make games. I just didn't really know how. So I thought that like the skills I did have would translate pretty fluidly. Some did, some didn't, but it seemed like less of a leap than maybe if I was doing something else. And it was just a good time to leave my job because the landscape of sort of the design I was working on, I was really lucky. I worked on some really awesome stuff in that career, but the landscape was kind of changing, and I kind of saw the writing on the wall. So it was a good time to kind of go back to school for a little while. Yeah. So.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, I mean that's definitely something that I think a lot of people. It's a scary thing to do to say, oh, I've got a career here. I'm doing this. I have these skills. People know me as this, and I'm gonna go do something completely different. I'm gonna go to school after working for 10 years.
Well, it was definitely my wife, girlfriend at the time, that kind of pushed me to do that because, you know, she kind of has a very multidisciplinary background, and we discussed design a lot, aesthetics a lot, and I'd often play video games and then pick them apart with her. Maybe she'd watch me play, or maybe she just wanted to be part of that conversation. And I think she just kind of got sick of hearing it. She was like, "Just go study this. Go get a bloody job in this industry." So, yeah,
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great to have people in your life who motivate you to be your better self and to do the things that they can tell that you really actually want to do.
Yeah.
That's really, really cool. And so you went through, so it was a year-long design program that you went through. Where was that?
This is the University of Montreal, but it was largely besieged with strikes. A lot of strikes in French Canadian universities.
That's hilarious.
So in fact, I just got a lot of time to work on Fract, basically, at the last half of this like 8 to 12 month program, depending on how you kind of structured it. So yeah, I just kind of kept working on Fract while the school was on strike, and yeah.
That's so funny. That's an interesting circumstance there. And so did you? Well, it sounds like you didn't have maybe as much game education as you thought you were going to get. Although I guess it got the job done. What do you think of as the kind of value of these formal game education programs that are kind of cropping up in the past 10 years or so? Was that valuable in kind of hindsight? Would you have pursued that, knowing what you know now, or do you think maybe you would have taken a different route?
Well, there's kind of two pieces to that puzzle. One piece was it was a component, or it was part of the Ubisoft campus here in Montreal. So there was an association with Ubisoft, and the perception was that it would help in kind of maybe securing a job at Ubisoft here in Montreal.
Right.
Absolutely not the case, unfortunately. They were kind of phasing out that sort of connection with the universities and the schools at the time. No one really knew, so it's no one's fault. But that's just kind of the way it was. But it turned out to be a really good program for high-level kind of design analysis and kind of approaching design from different perspectives. It was not a technical program in the grand scheme of things, where there are programs out there that's like, oh, we're going to teach you how to rig, and you spend a year or 2 or 3 learning how to rig a model. Like, none of that. It was more like it was a more holistic view, which is kind of what I was after, because I mean, you can learn tools pretty easily these days. It's a lot harder to learn why, I think, by yourself. Yeah. So yeah.
Absolutely. No, that's cool. That's definitely. I share that view that nowadays, learning to operate a piece of software or to kind of do the fundamentals of writing code or something is not so hard. But definitely having that kind of intellectual community or community of practice is interesting and valuable. So that's cool. And so then, so you moving forward, you made your prototype, submitted to. So what was in the prototype that you submitted to the IGF? How far along was the concept?
Well, the kind of the basic structure was there, where you'd explore this kind of abstract world, similar sort of aesthetic, same sort of approach where there's very little hand holding, so the player has to infer what's going on and kind of discovering what the puzzles are as part of the puzzle as well. So that was all there, and Spirit was very similar to what Fract became, but in terms of scope, much smaller, and in terms of like what I wanted to do with giving the player the power to write and sort of have influence on the music was like less than a fraction of what we ended up with. Because at the end of that original prototype, I basically gave the player this very simple pattern sequencer where they could, put a number of bars together. There was no actual sequencing of melodies or what have you, and it was very rudimentary, but it worked, and it really got people excited, and I think it communicated this idea of musical exploration versus inside the context of exploration, and I guess that's what kind of intrigued people, so we just pushed it that much further. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. So you win your award at the IGF, and what was kind of the process like of, I mean, you mentioned a lot of yelling and deep kind of soul searching with your wife. What was the process of saying, okay, I'm going to take this and I'm going to push it, like that kind of next leap of saying, okay, I'm going to take this and make a commercial project?
It was, I think we just saw a lot of potential and all this visibility and excitement, and we thought it'd be kind of absurd to not try and capitalize on it. So we thought, okay, let's do this. It's only going to take a year, max, 8 months.
Of course.
Of course. Like, we'll hire someone, we'll remake the prototype. That was the original plan, to just remake the original game just well. Because since I'd made it, I'm not a programmer, to save my life, it was held together with toothpicks. And yeah, so that was the hope. Of course, things change, scale changes, and just having a perception of how long it takes to make things when you don't have the experience is dangerous. And this consistent, 6 more months, 1 more year, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that does seem to be, a big part of this show is kind of trying to give some perspective from people with more experience to those of us who are kind of starting off and learning. And that thing of scope just seems to, it's like the thing that everybody says, like, start small, make Pong, do something tiny, and then scale up, and you're always going to think it's going to take a year, and then it takes 5 years. And so, kind of looking back, what do you think some of the biggest sort of underestimations that you made were?
I think polish is one. We did get to a point where the scale of the project was very, very large. In fact, Fract OSC was supposed to be at one point quarter of the game. We were going to do this episodic thing that explored turntable culture, sampler culture, and drum machine culture, and OSC was just going to be the synthesizer kind of aspect of the game. And we tackled that one first because it was the least designed. Like, we had design documents and everything else, and we're like, let's be adults and tackle the one that's hardest first. And yeah, and basically once that sort of initial tech evolved that could do the synthesis in real time, that's when we started going down the rabbit hole of what the game would actually be. So in terms of learning, having a good plan, we just didn't, and that's on me. I didn't have a clear design plan. Like, we had a design Bible for something, but it wasn't held together with enough conviction or reason, and as a result, it just sort of crumbled at the edges, and that game never got made. And then the other thing was knowing when to stop. Like, you can foresee feature creep. You can foresee this scenario where the game gets too big, but like I said, polish is like getting something good enough to be playable. To sell it to someone, it's a couple 100% more work. Like, you build a prototype, it's fun, it works, but getting it to the point where it's like, okay, like selling it is just there's just so much more involved in getting it to that to that point, and it's kind of this almost never-ending point where everything just starts to slow down at the end of the project. Like, we were arguably done Fract OSC mechanically a year before release. So
Right.
that last year was just tightening the screws, which is crazy.
And yeah, I mean, so you're talking about a 3-year dev cycle, right, for the commercial version. So it's 30% polish time, you know.
Well, for us, I mean, yeah, we could have polished more, to be honest. You know, we could have
Sure.
polished for 2 more years probably. But you know,
Yeah.
there was a sanity point where it's just like, okay, this is good enough. It can go.
Ship.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's another great point. I mean, there's a lot to touch on there, but the having experimented with prototyping and stuff myself, you could have a prototype working in 3 hours, you know, if you kind of know some fundamentals, you know, and be like, oh yeah, the guy's jumping and he's doing this, and you're like, yeah, this is easy, you know, and then when you're like, oh, but then I want this little thing to happen, and that takes like a day. And then the next thing takes a day, and the next, and you're like, oh, it'd be really cool if we had like some particle effects, and that takes a day to get it to actually look right. So I think that is an easy mistake to make, and something that I think really, I don't know if you can tell people that in advance, you know, and get through to them, but it's a good.
I don't think you can, because everyone did tell us that, and we obviously didn't pick up on it. Maybe me saying, "Oh, everyone told us that, and we didn't listen." Maybe will help a few people listen. I know Rami, my wife told me Rami of Lambier said this, and I hope I'm going to misquote my wife, and maybe she misquoted Rami, but for every day of prototyping, that was X months of polish.
Yeah.
Like, there you go. You know, it's like, whoa, shit, this is good. Let's turn this into something solid. Months, and yeah, you know, I mean, they're in apples to oranges. Every game's different, and their games are hyper polished. Like, their games are super tight for something that, at least on the surface, looks simple, but very much isn't. So every game's different. You know, like, it depends. But I thought that was a very salient point. Like, yes, you know, getting it good enough to ship is so much work. Yeah. Keep it small.
That's a really cool point, and I feel like for those who haven't seen it, look up the Juice It or Lose It talk by Petri Perho and I think it's Martin Jonassen. But they talk a lot about polish, and they take a breakout clone, which is black and white with nothing happening, and they change no mechanics and just add polish, and suddenly it's like amazing. It's like seems super fun, and so. You know, what was some of the work that went into polishing Fract that people might not just kind of immediately notice on the surface?
Well, I think because it's 3D, there's just so much kind of collider garbage you have to deal with, especially in a game with no jump. Like, we eliminated jump for design reasons, and it's like, at least from a design perspective, it's probably one of the most requested things in the game. It's like, oh, I wish I could jump. Because, you know, there's these little ledges, and it's this huge world, and I'm managing all the assets. So, you know, I spent weeks smoothing out the terrain to make it work as well as I could. But, of course, there's probably still hundreds of cases in the game where the player kind of, oh, come on, this is like a 3-inch bump that I want to walk over. And that's one of those, like, oh, we appropriate some systemic solution or blah blah blah. Like, I could have probably spent 2 more months just polishing that alone. But little things like Fract was just such a big project that and everything was plugged into everything that it's hard to kind of point at one specific polish thing, because it's like, well, oh, you tweak that puzzle so that choice concatenates up here. Is there anything else that was just a big time sink in terms of polish? I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, I gotta say, I maybe my eyes are attuned to this more than some, but I noticed, you know, the game has some very nice, you know, like the all of the door opening animations, you know, it gives you a lot. It's something simple. It's a door opening, right? But there's a lot of movement, all these kind of hexagons, and then you know, perhaps obviously, but worth noting, just some incredible sound design, which really made some of those moments and movements just feel very, just like the door opening and it goes, it does all these sounds. It's super satisfying, That was something I really noticed, was how, obviously it's a game about sound, so that's going to be foregrounded, but just how some of the simple interactions, how the sound really made them feel juicy and rich.
Thank you. I mean, it's always been. Well, yeah, I think there's no reason why. We have the infinite power of computers. Why something as simple as flicking a switch or opening a door can always feel satisfying. It's like why not? Especially in a world like Fract, where it's like, oh, they could just walk on this platform. It's like, well, how about when they approach the platform and goes like this?
Yeah, exactly.
Why not? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that stuff, and I mean, that was one of the level, and it goes back to the amount of time spent on polish. I think it really comes through the level of a lot of the what could be mundane actions, like I'm walking over here, and then suddenly this like platform, kind of scrolls out and rotates in or scales in, really made some of those interactions feel a lot richer than obviously they would have if it was like it's a cube, I'm walking on the cube,
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a really interesting thing to observe. Now, so let's talk about sound for a second. Because of my sound background, I'm going to geek out a little bit, so I apologize if anybody's kind of lost in this, but what is the actual synthesis tech in the engine? You mentioned it's all being synthesized in real time.
Actually, not all of it. We definitely use our share of samples, and
okay.
in kind of the traditional sort of game dev parlance, stems. So our musical collaborator Mogi wrote these sort of supporting stems that react to our synthesizers in game. So all of the kind of puzzles are built around sort of a subtractive analog, vintage analog style synthesizer, and that's being synthesized in real time. So as you kind of solve the puzzles and you hear the notes and the melodies build, and any melodies you write yourself, and any shaping that happens as a result. So all of like the main synths, the sort of primary synths of each puzzle are your doing, and those are controlled under the hood by our engine. And for those synth geeks out there, it's a 8-voice, 2 oscillator per voice, like subtractive analog style. So, and each of those 8 voices can be like all together, in unison, polyphonic, spread out, whatever, depending on the needs of the puzzle. But yeah, we definitely still use a fair amount of samples because it's all running in pure data in the background.
Oh, cool.
So it's kind of like, for those that know Max MSP, it's like the open source unfriendly version of Max MSP. Not that Max is super friendly. Well, it's plenty friendly, but
well, Max is yeah.
But so basically, we'd build these. We'd end up building patches, and these patches are primarily the synths in the game. And then if you're like doing the one-shot sound effect for pushing the button that goes kabloop, you don't want to make like a 10-screen patch for that. Of
course.
That's going to be a sample. And equally, when collaborating with Mogi, he would like play the game and then compose like in real time, kind of on top. And then as he was playing the puzzles, he would write music that kind of reacts to what's happening with the puzzles. And those are stems of the game. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I mean, I got the set clearly in the studio mode. You've got, there's filtering happening and there's stuff happening, which, I mean, you could have done with samples, but, I'm going to say I could hear that you were doing it in real time, which is really exciting. I mean, that's an area that this is one of the things that was most coming from a kind of a music tech geek background. It was one of the things that was really exciting to me to see. Something I've been very interested in is using. I mean, obviously now inside of things like Max MSP, there's just an incredible array of interesting musical processing we can do in real time. Games are so graphics focused. It's an area I'm very interested to explore myself. So you used pure data. So pure data is open source. So was that taking chunks of pure data and building it into your engine?
Yeah, basically, there's and I might not be using the terminology correctly, that would be Hank, our programmer and Pure Data Wizard. There's a library called libpd, which allows you to embed Pure Data in your application. In our case, an external plugin for Unity. But it's nowhere near that simple. Hank, I mean, it still took nearly 2.5, 3 years to refine our plugin because Pure Data, like Max MSB, is like kind of this standalone thing. Like people use it a lot for like performance art, or like it's like this sort of thing that just does its thing. It's like it's got maybe inputs or sensors if you're getting fancy for like installation art and what have you, but that's it. You aren't dynamically loading and unloading and allocating all kinds of things. Like those 8 synth voices I mentioned before have to dynamically allocate. So it's like once I walk far enough away from that synth, it has to let go not just of that voice, but it has to say, oh, we'll turn off all those 100 sequencers over there. And as I approach this one, it's like, oh, we'll allocate this voice to this synth and stuff like that. And same goes with Hank had to write a custom like sample allocation and all this, and that was really difficult. We would like to release it like the core of it that isn't like our game specific because it'd just be confusing. We would like to release that open source at some point. But,
that'd be awesome.
But we're just kind of taking a break right now. But yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine that you guys need a break after three years. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want to just turn this into like an audio geek fest. But so is PD running all of the audio in the game, or were you also using like another piece of audio ware?
For a while, we were passing PD through Unity's sound engine, but in the end, we're just completely doing everything in our own sound, like our own PD thing. So it's all PD. Yeah.
Cool. That's awesome. So PD was handling the sample playback and the stems and stuff.
Then spatialization and all that. And
wow.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Sounds like you needed 3 years.
Yeah.
It's impressive, man. That's well done. And again, this is maybe very nerdy, but what percentage of your kind of computer resources budget, like CPU and stuff, went to audio versus graphics?
This is tricky because when you're running like a piece of audio software like Ableton Live, like if you just do a pretty simple instance of their analog synth, which by all accounts is a pretty efficient synth, turn it up to 8 voices and press 8 keys on your keyboard, you're going to see that little CPU thing go up, you know? Put some reverb on that, some delay, you know, maybe a compressor. Yeah, like we're talking a serious chunk of CPU. So, like our synth engine is like pretty accurate as far as the synth engine goes. Like it is simulating things the same way. There are some shortcuts for sure that make it a little bit lighter, but yeah, it's a very CPU-driven game, and most games, even AAA dude shooters, like they're not pushing CPU the way we're pushing CPU. So
I imagine, yeah.
It's definitely been, it definitely was a struggle. Like at times we were doing some things that weren't so efficient for the GPU, so we had to optimize our graphics, and then other times we're optimizing the CPU. At the end of the day, though, like if the GPU chokes a little, it chokes a little. But if your CPU chokes in our game, yeah, it's a pretty detrimental like effect. So a lot of profiling. A lot of like Hank built a lot of custom profiling and making the synth engine as efficient as possible, which has been actually the same way we've been polishing. I've been polishing content for a year, like that last year. I'd say Hank's primarily been polishing optimization, especially on our sound engine. So yeah, like CPU is definitely a bottleneck, but maybe we get away with some things because we're not doing much physics, and while we are putting a lot of polygons on screen, like we're not stressing like much GPU RAM or blah blah blah. So
right,
it would have been great if it ran on even slower computers, but I think we did the best we could with what's going on in the background. Yeah.
That's awesome. No, very, very interesting. I mean, it's working with audio, I mean, audio alone, yeah, can chew through CPU pretty readily, especially as you say, once you've got some polyphony and some reverb. So the fact that you're running that and then running a game and, running an instance of Unity or whatever on top of that is, I can imagine there was some optimization needed. Did you start the project in Unity? Was the prototype done in Unity?
Yeah, I did that solo in Unity 2 point whatever. I don't know. Yeah, and I just built it in that with some very basic Unity script and literally no idea what I was doing. So with kind of someone had shown me that Unity did get along well with Cinema 4D, which in 2010 no one was using for game design because it's like it is not optimized for that sort of workflow at all. Like it's for like motion design and offline rendering and what have you. Like you're not going to be animating like meshes of dudes running in Cinema 4D. But that's what I knew, and it's a very kind of parametric and playful way to model. So it worked for me. And I'm like, well, I know Cinema 4D. I'll dive into Unity, and the rest was kind of history. Yeah.
That's awesome. And so now, having spent 3 years with Unity, is the honeymoon over, or are you still enjoying working with it?
It's got its hiccups, man. I mean, every tool does, right? Like, but it's good. It's certainly very good. Like, yeah, you use any tool long enough, and you'll learn to hate the parts of it you hate, and you learn to get good at the parts of it that you can be. I mean, I can't really. There's not much I can say overtly negative about it. That like, the only like truly thing we hated and we were surprised by and we paid money for was the asset server. We lost weeks of man hours fixing problems that the asset server caused. So I would say if anyone's looking at purchasing Unity and maybe going down the like how to manage their version control, stay the hell away from asset server. Just use Git or something like that. But beyond that, yeah, I mean, there's a couple things about Unity. They're kind of a black box. Some of the rendering is a black box, and some of the physics, if I'm not mistaken, again, a bit over my head. It's a bit of a black box. But that's kind of what you get. It's kind of what you pay for, right? So it more or less just works really quite well most of the time, and I think it's a pretty awesome tool. And it's definitely opened up game dev to so many more people. I mean, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and I made a game that won an IGF award. So there you go, right?
I mean, exactly. That's a great testimony to the value of Unity as a platform. Just for and it's something that I definitely. It's something that I've worked quite a bit with, and it's something I would definitely recommend if you're someone new to game development, and especially if you're interested in working in 3D. Is a great place to start. They've also launched their 2D tools, which are a little newer now, but it is I think, and the fact that there's a very robust free version is pretty awesome. So that's really cool. Well, so thinking about the team a little bit, so you kind of focused. I mean, you initiated the project, right? So you're kind of like lead game designer, but then you're more on the art side, I guess.
Well, there's kind of three of us. There's my wife, Quinn, who she would influence design quite a bit as well. Like, she's very into electronic music culture and what have you, and she's got a very strong aesthetic design sense, as well as she had major influence on a lot of the puzzles in the game. But she also ran sort of production, communications, those sort of aspects of the game, kind of keeping the wheels on. And then Hank does all the programming. I don't do any. Hank's super talented programmer, so I wouldn't even dare to poke my finger in there. But also, Hank had a lot of influence on design as well. So I mean, we all kind of had influence on how the game worked and how it was designed. And I kind of did like assets, so all the art, all the animation. The non-music sound design is all me. So like all the sound effects and things, all that kind of stuff, and a lot of the ambient sound design is me. And then kind of the puzzle design and how the puzzles fit together is largely me. But as I said, like like the whole green area of the game, which is one of Hank's favorite sets of puzzles. Like those puzzles are actually my wife's idea, and a lot of the systems in the pink puzzles, well, I kind of did the initial scaffolding of them. Hank kind of had the epiphany that I think made them a lot stronger. And then we also had a sound intern at the beginning of the project that helped us kind of do the pure data prototype, because we didn't start with the pure data idea. That kind of came. And then we had another guy from Montreal, Devin Lulin Vega. He does some really cool indie stuff. He really got us started on the right path in terms of world and environment design. He's got a really cool methodology, and he does great stuff. And like we already had built quite a bit of stuff, but he kind of took our stuff and then showed us how awesome it could be. So it was kind of the kernel that we evolved the world around. And then I finished the world design and what have you. And then finally, Mogi Grumbles, who's our musical collaborator and composer, he wrote so much music for the game. It's kind of unbelievable. But yeah, he really brought the tone of the game. It was just, yeah, he brought so much to the game. Yeah, it was really awesome. Yeah, so that's our team.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's really inspiring to see something as rich as what you created, created by a relatively small number of people. It's really cool to see. I didn't know, actually. I know Devin Lulin Vega's stuff. I didn't know that he worked on this. Very interesting designer. Very interesting aesthetic that he's got going throughout his different types of work. You guys also under the name Alice Effect, for anybody who's interested in finding him, you guys should definitely check his stuff out. I'd love to actually get him on the show sometime. What's it like working with your wife?
Is she gonna watch this? Yeah. It's awesome.
Careful.
Yeah. It is really, really awesome. I think there's some challenges too, right? Like first, like we also work out of our home, so it's hard to not let like work stresses bleed into personal stresses or personal stresses bleed into work stresses. And we had a daughter in the middle of making this game, which was completely nuts. So yeah, we all had, and Hank became so close that he's like family now. So yeah, there were some strong up and downs throughout the whole process. More than anything, I think working with Quinn, I think we kind of just learned to communicate. Everyone on the team learned to communicate better, and to just also not just like communicate more clearly, but also be sensitive to how others interpret things as well. So it's like, so just being mindful of like how people interpret what we say. It doesn't mean we pussyfoot around if there's an issue or a problem. We can totally tell each other whether our shit stinks, but at the same time it's like different personalities interact with like different methods differently. And just I know for Quinn and I, and for Hank, we all developed a greater understanding of what our roles were over the course of the project. Like Hank is like basically a mathematician. Like it's so complicated what he does that and sometimes in the beginning we'd be frustrated, like, why doesn't it work? And it's like, if he were to try and explain it, like there's no way we'd understand. And he'd be frustrated because he couldn't explain, or vice versa. Like Quinn might say, well, why is that design not working? And equally, it's like maybe she was involved in the conception of that design, but she couldn't understand why it wasn't working because of the number of moving pieces involved in actually implementing it, or vice versa. I would be like, well, Quinn, why hasn't this happened yet? And then it's like, oh, it's actually much more complicated than we originally kind of envisioned. So I think we'd all just got a better understanding of what everyone's roles were. It was definitely a growing process, but yeah, I don't know. We were really lucky. Everyone who worked on the project was super cool, and we had got some external help from others as well, and lots of feedback from Indie Fund and other devs as well, and that was great. So yeah, in terms of the people, and we got everything right in terms of the people. We made a lot of mistakes in terms of like making the game, but we got the people right. Everyone was super cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think that's a very great advice, just kind of generally for collaboration and for relationships. So I think that's I can tell that you've learned a lot through the process. And I mean, because I think that's something that's hard for a lot of people in creative fields is, that creative collaborative process and finding the right people to collaborate with, being able to communicate in a way that it's obviously an emotional process, that people don't end up hating each other and destroying the project, and so that's really really good advice. So you, I mean, we'll bring this to a close relatively soon. What was it like working with the Indie Fund?
Oh, great. I mean, yeah, just awesome. They're so cool. I don't even know how to put it into words. They were enthusiastic. They helped us out, and they also were like we asked for a lot of advice and they gave it. And I think in a lot of scenarios they were willing to be pretty hands off. And when we asked them questions and kind of to give us feedback, and I don't know, it was just awesome. They were just there, yeah, kind of a dream come true in that sort of scenario. So yeah,
that's fantastic.
Yeah,
very cool. All right, let me see. I just have a few notes here. So here, this is an interesting. This kind of doubles back to what we were talking about earlier, but it was something that I kind of noted in your story, and I thought was interesting. You kind of, it sounds like, started out interested in. I mean, you mentioned Ubisoft and the idea that the program you're in kind of had some connections there, and you kind of seems like you started out interested in maybe going and working in the sort of more commercial part of the industry. And then ended up kind of going the independent route. What was that sort of? What led you through that process?
I just couldn't get hired. It's that bloody simple. I couldn't get a job as a tester. I don't know if I was overqualified because of my sort of art direction and design career, but no one would hire me. No one would hire me, and that was super frustrating. So while no one was hiring me, I was polishing Fract. And then I actually did get one job offer right before heading to the IGF, right before leaving on that trip. And it was a pretty good offer as a legit game designer at a social game, sort of Facebook game company. And admittedly, while that's kind of a dirty word, they actually make pretty cool games. Like from a design perspective, they had value. In my opinion, but yeah, I kind of wasn't indie because it was hip or because it was a choice. I guess I was indie because I couldn't get a job, and then winning the IGF obviously changed a lot of things for us and changed kind of, but oh my God, is this something we could actually do? I mean, to be honest, I always intended to work for myself eventually, but I thought I'd probably spend a decade at somewhere like Ubisoft or something in Montreal or whatever before, building that network, learning on someone else's time, and then maybe breaking out on my own later. In fact, that was the plan. But the IGF kind of jump-started things, which is scary because we went into it with no clue and no experience and no network and no idea how to do any of this. But thought it would be foolish to pass up an opportunity like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. No, I love that story just because I think that it's the kind of necessity is the mother of invention kind of thing, and I love the fact that the closed door of the kind of commercial industry and the fact that you weren't willing to give up kind of led you into this very interesting direction on your own is wonderful and inspiring, and something that I think. Well, as someone who is not 16, kind of looking up at game design, who has kids and has had a career in another field, or has a career in another field, I think that it's cool to see that you brought kind of although it was your first game, you had been creating work for a long time, and you kind of brought your skills and your expertise and your aesthetics to this new field and did something that was noticed immediately. Is a very interesting, sort of heartening for me. But it's very cool. I mean, it's not a question; it's a statement. But I think it's very interesting to see.
And I think the landscape is changing. I think I think that's important what you're describing. I think people coming in and making games from different perspectives is a very, very very important things for games and making games. I mean, I remember when I first kind of broke in to the scene. The vast majority of people were super enthusiastic and super helpful, and like we're like, oh man, it's really cool that you're doing something different. But I was met with animosity as well because I wasn't from this. I didn't have an encyclopedic background of games because I've been fucking working my ass off for the past 15 years. I haven't had time to play games. And that was a source of contention. Now, not a chance. It's a much more open and inviting system where people like from completely different backgrounds are diving in and making games, and that's super exciting. The tools are friendly enough, and also just the environment is friendly enough. Like, go to a jam. Like, your childhood educator who also plays in a black metal band. Well, shit, go to a game jam and meet some people and make something crazy. Bring your bass guitar and just make the craziest game you can imagine. There's so much to be found there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I definitely feel that having kind of over the past year or so kind of got engaged with the indie scene, for lack of a better word, just the game development scene. It's very welcoming, and I feel like there's a big hunger right now for people to bring different perspectives. It's not only games about games. There are people bringing in different types of subject matter, different types of mechanical ideas, and I think it's a very interesting time. Which leads me to, this is a little bit of a kind of a hoary old question, but it's something that I'm interested in. There's been a lot of talk, and I feel like actually your game this is sort of relevant too, because some people might kind of put this under the heading of kind of like an art game, or want to talk about it in the kind of games as art context. And there's been a lot of discussion about games and art games art, or whatever. And there was a very interesting. It's a video. It's on YouTube. It was done by Arto, which is like the German TV company of Jason Rohrer and Chris Crawford talking about this topic. And Chris Crawford said something very interesting. He was like, yeah, everybody is trying to call their games art because games, something that's like just fun and it's not like edifying or educational or is like a dirty thing. And therefore everybody's trying to call what is fundamentally a game, they're trying to be like, no, it's art, it's valid, it should be in a museum, I don't know if you have any perspective on that.
Well, it's tricky. I mean, I think as these sort of dynamic and interactive systems that kind of exist within games, I think it's hard for people, even game makers, to kind of wrap their head around why these things or even exist, or why they're being made, and what that validity kind of speaks to. Wow, and that I just basically didn't say anything just there. The idea that I guess I don't know. I could just find it kind of like an absurd discussion. Like, why are we putting so much effort into this as opposed to just making things? And I think there can be some beauty in hyper simple systems that are designed versus very complex, and in systems that are designed to invoke or infer a specific thought process. I think there's something interesting at all ends of the spectrum. I don't know. I think, but there's pressures also equally. Like, Fract is a lot gamier because we decided we were going to make something we were going to sell.
Yeah.
When we started this game 3 years ago, it's like, well, we're making a video game we're going to sell for bucks. So it's not some weird abstract experiment, and that was a decision we made 3 years ago. Now, you don't necessarily have to make that same decision now in 2014. You can make something pretty abstract and pretty arty, like contextually. Yeah. So I think that's exciting, but I don't know. I mean, it's a tough question to answer. I don't know. I mean, we just came off E3 this week. We just saw all the announcements of E3, and I think the whole industry just has a lot of growing up to do. I mean, I like dude shooters. I like shooting dudes just as much as anyone else, but
Sure.
I just feel like a few $1 billion was spent this week in advertising just killing stuff. And from a design perspective, it seems like the lowest hanging possible fruit. Like we're designing these hyper real and hyper high definition whack-a-mole simulators, and it's just like, come on, like we can still do that. I mean, maybe a couple of those a season are still great and fun, but it's like, can we start celebrating other aspects of games right now? And I don't know why games are a dirty word, but that's part of it.
Yeah.
I can't tell my aunt with a straight face what I do. I have friends who work for defense contractors who basically work for companies that build weapons of destruction, weapons that are actually made to kill people, abstractly or whether directly. And that job, when you go to a party with a bunch of random people, that job has more respect than making a video game that maybe teaches people about making music. Because why? Because of things like E3, where it's just like, it's a murder festival. And there are so many other games out there that aren't murder festivals, and they're beautiful, and they're awesome, and they're going to stand the test of time. But it's just, I think it's just kind of a shame. And I don't know what that piece of work is going to be that maybe starts to, will it be a singular thing or sort of a shift? And maybe we're starting to see that shift now. I don't know, but yeah, I think that word game kind of being embarrassing is, you're right, and I think that problem exists because my mom's proud of me, but I'm not going to tell, like, it's like, oh, yeah, it's just the average person's outside of indie games perception of games is like, yeah, they're all murder simulations.
Yeah.
They are.
No, yeah, no, it's true, and I mean the massive kind of preponderance, as you say, of like murder, like shoot this guy and his arm flies off, and these HD blood particles spatter on the camera and stuff, and some guys lovingly crafting that for 6 months of 14-hour days, yeah, I think it's an interesting. I guess my kind of thesis with it is that it's like people don't consider chess to be trivial. Chess is a game. The person who designed chess, or the people, or the process that chess evolved over, was an incredibly rich and relevant part of our culture. And the fact that just by calling something a game means it's kind of shameful and without value, or it's like, that's going to rot your brain, it's a waste of time, it's, is something that I just feel resentful of. And the fact that then people are going to be like, oh, we're going to have to put on the mantle of art to kind of shield ourselves from this, or that, or that like the AAA guys are all like, Hollywood, yes, no, it's like Hollywood, cinema is legitimate, like it's like cinema, it's like, come on, like, be proud of what you do. It as what it, anyway. I'm ranting a little bit, but it's just my kind of current rant.
No, it's fair. I can say though, maybe I just am not paying attention. I haven't heard a lot of people hide behind the mantle of this as art, thankfully. But maybe I just haven't been listening very well.
Oh, that's a good point. I don't think it's a lot of people doing it. I just see that as like the defensiveness of, no, games are art too. Games are art, and I'm just like, dude, a game is a game, and it's super valuable just for being that, and deep and interesting. Anyway, it's, but yeah. All right. I think I have asked the questions that I wanted to ask, and I wanted to say thank you so much for coming on. For people who want to find out about you and find out about Fract OSC, where would you direct them?
Okay. Well, I'd say head to our website, fractgame.com. We're on Twitter as FractGame, all one word. And myself, Richard Flanagan, you can find me on Twitter as Phosfiend, Phosfiend. And yeah, thanks for having me, man. Great talking about this stuff, and it's nice to talk about oscillators every once in a while.
Yeah, dude. I'm happy to talk about oscillators whenever you want to. So thanks again for coming on, and the game is awesome. Everybody, if you haven't checked it out yet, highly recommend it, especially if you're interested in music. It's a very, very engaging and kind of rich world. So yeah, thanks, dude.
Cheers.
All right. Oh, wait, no.